Sanctuary, Heavenly Birthstones, Part 25, compiled by Shirley Jean Street and read by Wayne T. Street. Because Rachel, the wife Jacob loved best, believed her fate was to be childless, she begged Jacob to marry her maid Bilhah, and vicariously produce children Rachel could claim and raise as her own. Consequently, Jacob's fifth son, Dan, was born. His name meant judge. His sign was cut deep into the golden topaz. His stone might be considered to be Dan's gravestone, since he failed to find his way into the kingdom of God, and his name is missing from the list of the safe to save. Dan was a liar and a thief, Revelation 21, verse 8. These two common and evil practices can completely destroy faith, trust, relationships, and lives. He was a cruel critic who chose to detect only the negative in others and broadcast it to all who would listen. He represents those who start out with great promise but quit. Prophet Samuel, King Saul, going against God, King Saul sought a sorcerer to speak to Samuel, who was dead. Jacob predicted, Dan shall judge his people, but Dan's nature was the opposite. He misused his exceptional gifts of keen observation and quick discernment so necessary to a judge. Because he perverted gifts which were intended to be a blessing, he caused others to fall. Joseph's cruel brothers sold him to a slave trader for 20 pieces of silver. Judas threw down before the high priest the 30 pieces of silver they paid him to betray Christ. The very circumstances of Dan's conception were adverse. Rachel's suggestion that her husband marry her maid Bilhah set a wrong example for her sister Leah, and this brought rivalry, friction, hatred, and a host of other ills into the family life of Jacob. If God's way had been followed, several of Jacob's children would never have been born. They were not a part of heaven's plan and were conceived in sin. But God works with what we present to him and demonstrates the power of his grace by taking weak and sinful human beings conceived in immorality and transforming them into sons and daughters of the heavenly King. Unwilling to commit himself to the cause of God, Dan pulled away from his colleagues in their time of desperate need. The only man of any distinction ever to emerge from this tribe was Samson, and what bizarre pictures his name conjures up in our minds. Inspiration has left this insight into his fickle nature, and the Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp of Dan. Judges 13, verse 25. What spirit moved him at other times? Inspiration has not left us to wonder. His brief life of zealous service in the defense of Israel, when contrasted with his sinful devotion to the lust of the flesh, sums up the story of the unstable tribe to which Samson belonged. The light that shone from the golden topaz of his tribal gemstones failed to remind Dan of faith and love, and it left no impression on his lifestyle. The best of circumstances and environment will not have much influence on a person who decides to ignore God's way and will. Dan's sign was cut deep into the golden topaz. His stone might be considered to be Dan's gravestone, since he failed to find his way into the kingdom of God, and his name is missing from the list of the safe to save. It is believed that Levi will take Dan's place on the pearly gate, Revelation 7, verse 7. Dan has no counterpart in the foundations of the New Jerusalem, but outside the city, among the raging demons who would claw Christ from his great white throne, he joins the traitor Judas.